Okay, so welcome everybody to the Next BU podcast. So today on my show, I've got Andrew Stone, who's the lead developer of Bitcoin Unlimited and the founder of Bitcoin Unlimited. So, welcome, Andrew.
Hi,
Hey.
how are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So what we're going to go into today is miner validated tokens and specifically Andrew's proposal called Group, which is one of the possible technologies to achieve that on Bitcoin Cash. So we're going to go through into some of the history of it and how we can perhaps move forward with that on Bitcoin Cash. So, I mean, I guess the starting point is, you know, what are miner validated tokens and why are they important?
Sure. I guess the simplest thing is minor validated tokens is this idea to annotate UTXOs with um, a, a token identifier and a quantity, right? Um, and then if you've annotated a UTXO with that information, then a miner can go through and validate that, for example, quantity is conserved in a transaction, right? Being one of the most important functions of a token, right? Uh, and it, as you know, in Bitcoin, obviously, like the fundamental token has these similar functionality, right? In every transaction, quantity is conserved. So it would make sense that miners would provide that service for other tokens as well.
Right. So, like you say, Bitcoin is a miner validated token.
Exactly. It fundamentally is. Um, yeah, but then when you start having the concept of new tokens in the system, like the devil is in the details, because now you have to say to yourself, well, how do I mint new tokens and how do I melt them? Um, and how do I maybe constrain a token to a covenant, which would mean, introduce smart contracting features into tokens? And how do I create, fungible and non-fungible tokens and things like that, right? So, um, the whole group proposal is like 40 pages and it goes through all of these features in great detail with examples and, DeFi application ideas. But at its heart and in its fundamental consensus code, group tokens is very succinct and simple to understand.
Right. So, to kind of summarize, it's a way of adding tokens similar and not similar to Bitcoin on top or Bitcoin Cash on top of the network, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously has like a ton of different use cases. I mean, obviously, something that's used at the moment is on Bitcoin Cash is SLP, but SLP is not a miner validated token system. It's a token system that's essentially on top of, but has nothing to do with the consensus system of Bitcoin Cash.
Right. And that was, the best that could be done at the time, right? But it hasn't, I feel like it hasn't really achieved market traction with a lot of excitement going to Ethereum, right? And so I think it's time for us to perhaps create a miner validated token in Bitcoin Cash that could compete against SLP or upgrade SLP to be miner validated. Why is this important? Well, fundamentally, uh, in a client validated token like SLP, there's always some kind of uncertainty as to whether every sort of entity within the system is in consensus, right? So, like with Bitcoin, um, if there's a fork in the blockchain, if we fall out of consensus, it's completely obvious to all players and that can be healed, right? Um, but with something like SLP token or a client consensus token, every client needs to sort of validate the authenticity of a token on its own, right? So I could basically, commit to the blockchain lies that say I pay you, 200 tether onto the, blockchain. And so a client needs to search through the history and say, well, did that person have that 200, tethers in order to send to the next person, and they need to validate that whole history all the way back, right? Which is, what miners currently do using the UTXO set and so forth for Bitcoin. So what you can end up with is what I would call a silent fork, where a client has deviated from consensus, right? It thinks that the tokens are owned by different people than they really are, and nobody knows about it because there isn't this obvious and public split in a blockchain, right? Um, and so I think that there are other features around, but that's sort of like the fundamental key sort of security level feature is that miner validated tokens give you. And then there's also SPV validation for light clients.
Right, which obviously gives you kind of instant or semi-instant transactions, obviously to pay, like depending on your security trade-off, but it means that you could send transactions the same way you send Bitcoin Cash transactions now, in that you
Yeah,
essentially have the money as soon as it's sent.
exactly. And so, like with Bitcoin Cash right now, right, you don't need a full node to send coins. You can validate the presence of transactions using something called SPV proofs with a node that only has the headers of the blockchain, right? But that's not true for client validated tokens. They need the full history, or they need to trust some entity that has the full history, right? So if if you have a token that has a lot of popularity, you can imagine that its graph of transactions would far exceed what might be available, to a smartphone. Maybe not in theory, but reasonably. No one wants to be constantly tracking every transaction in, Tether on their smartphone, or, some highly traded stock or something that might move to a blockchain. Um, and so you end up having to, transfer your trust to some third party server that's maintaining sort of that knowledge for you, right? And I feel like this is the reason why maybe SLP tokens haven't gotten like a tremendous amount of uptake in wallets and things, right? Is because it's actually, you, you know, um, for a miner validated token, you can just reuse the existing infrastructure and say, give me this Bitcoin transaction. And oh, look, it also moves tokens, right? And can I have the Bitcoin, you know, um, uh, SPV proof of that transaction? Oh, there it is. Okay, I proved the token, right? But since you can't do that in client validated tokens, a whole separate infrastructure needed to be created, right? And if SLP were to move to miner validated tokens, actually, just to sort of put something down there, that infrastructure doesn't get thrown away, right? It's not wasted work because that infrastructure becomes like the Electrum protocol for Bitcoin, right? It's user friendly. It's really easy to access, right? But it can furnish proofs of the existence of tokens versus right now where you have to trust
Right, it becomes
trust the server.
trustless instead of,
Yes, it becomes
to
trustless,
some
but it's
degree,
still
trusted. Hmm.
yes, but it's still very valuable infrastructure as
Right.
an efficient way, an easy way for higher level apps to access this data.
Right. I mean, I want to push back a little bit on you on let's say how well SLP has done. I do think that they have like proven the concept, as it were, that there is definitely demand for tokens. I mean, obviously, well, I would say obviously that has already been proven by the fact that Ethereum, a massive part of its adoption has been through providing
Absolutely.
token systems. But SLP has done a very, very good job of showing that there is demand for tokens on Bitcoin Cash, even though the technology doesn't provide the same kind of functionality that miner validated tokens would. So, I think they've done a huge amount of work for showing and essentially proving that we do need something like group on Bitcoin Cash, because there may be a ton of companies out there that have considered it. They've looked at it. Okay, this is great for cheap token transfers, which, as far as I'm aware, you don't get on any other proof of work blockchain at the moment. But that they're not miner validated, and so that's a risk for them. Or let's say it's at least
Yeah.
extra work.
Yeah, I
So,
totally agree with that.
mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
So
so then unfortunately they go to Ethereum, right? And Ethereum, um, Ethereum, what just people might say, hey, you want to turn Bitcoin Cash into Ethereum with this, right? The answer is not at all, right? Ethereum is a distributed computer with finance layered on top, right? And if you're actually like coding like ERC-223 tokens or something like that, you quickly realize that, hey, every sort of token can be individually coded on top of this distributed computer, right? And that has advantages, which is you can do anything you want. That has huge disadvantages, which is you can screw it up, in so many ways. And more importantly, too, if you really want to be pedantic about it, since every token can be separately implemented, really every time you possess any token whatsoever, you really ought to go to the underlying contract and make sure that they're actually implementing it in a reasonable way, right? Or that they've used the standard ERC, 223 token implementation, right?
Which nobody's going
So
to do, or even be
Right, which
able to
nobody's
do.
going to do, and that's why there's all these bugs and money's lost all the time, right? So, and it's also very inefficient, right? So, what I want to do is provide these fundamental financial features like atomic, entities natively on Bitcoin Cash, right? And those, are effectively um, tokens, transaction introspection, and a little bit more ability to write scripts, like larger script sizes and things, right? And with those three things, we can basically create a financial blockchain, right? Focused on money, focused on Bitcoin Cash as the most important asset in this ecosystem, um, but in which you can very efficiently add other entities and create smart contracts that control their use, right? So the focus is very different, right? It's like a financial system, like a system of financial exchange, right? Whereas right now, by the way, we only have a system of transfer, right? You can send Bitcoin Cash, but you can't really exchange things, right? Um, so a system of financial exchange, um, with some smart contracting features on top to enable the financial exchange use cases.
Yeah, and I guess one of the other trade-offs that Ethereum and other uh, Turing complete blockchains is that they are inherently difficult to scale. This is why it's
Yes.
taken Ethereum years to even attempt to try to scale the blockchain. Whereas Bitcoin Cash, or let's say Bitcoin-like systems, the scripting system is much more efficient, essentially, because you can't, like you say, it can't do everything, but it can do many things.
Right, and just for the more technical people, very specifically, um, the UTXO system allows you to gather a bunch of inputs, right? And then you validate the transaction based on those inputs. And once you've executed that transaction and validated it, you never have to do so again. All you have to do is make sure that those same inputs still exist because the state of those inputs never changes, right? So if the inputs exist, the transaction. If it validated once, it will validate every time. There's no change, right? And so what that allows us to do in Bitcoin Cash is execute the transactions sort of outside of the block, right? Once to make sure they're valid. And then when the block comes in, we don't need to revalidate all the scripts. All we need to do is ensure that the inputs still exist. The inputs haven't been spent. So that's a fundamental sort of scaling advantage, right? I also think that by creating some of these features natively, like check data sig and signatures and tokens, there will be just simply scalability advantages, right? Because instead of having to implement those in an interpreted language, right, they just exist hard coded.
Right, and obviously one of the advantages of having that scalability is cost. I mean, if you look at Ethereum right now, I haven't looked today, but I mean it's I think normally now like $1.50 or something to send a transaction. It's got higher than that. Um, this is not a small sum of money to send a token. So,
No.
I know for a fact that many of the some of the biggest use cases on Ethereum, some of the most used smart contracts have had to essentially just shut down because they actually don't function when transaction fees are that high. So a massive advantage seems to be just having transactions that cost less than a cent. Like that people don't seem to understand how fundamentally important that is.
Right, right. And the scalability work that we've done, added to token use, right? Token use could create a lot of, I mean, why are we even doing scalability, right? Like Bitcoin Unlimited is putting down, 256 megabyte blocks like every 10 minutes on ScaleNet without any problems at all. And it's like, it's not even consuming, you know, all the CPU on my computer, right? It does that without even really breaking a sweat, right? Why are we doing that, right? So we need to create uh, use cases now to fill the some of that space, right? And if we sit here and protect that space and say it can only be for Bitcoin Cash, then we will never use that space, right? The world will move on with Ethereum as the smart contracting system, and Bitcoin. Uh, um, what do you call it? Re sort of transferred over to
Oh,
Ethereum,
what, like
probably through some
wrapped,
trust
right? Yeah.
wrapped, wrapped tokenized Bitcoin will be, the money, right? That's what's going to happen if we don't do something about this. And I personally think that is a problem, right? And the reason why is because the only way, well, everyone is trying to wrap the Bitcoin with less and less trust, right? But there's always a chunk of trust involved, which is that Bitcoin has to exist on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And when there's that, trust involved, no matter how many signers there are, at some point those finance guys are going to get together and be like, well, if we could invest that backing, right? If we could invest that, then we're going to make a lot of money, right? So how can we invest that, right? And so then all of a sudden what happens is they cook up some scheme, and suddenly, you're not 100% reserved. And guess what? You can't run away from the system because there's so much, investment involvement and, transactions in that system, right? So, this is why I want this sort of stuff on Bitcoin Cash, right? We have a very viable, competitive, you know, possible solution. We just have to kind of go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I feel like the hypothesis that Bitcoin Cash just has to be, digital value and that's enough that you can transfer. That's kind of been, in my opinion at least, been kind of proven wrong over the last 3 years because
Yeah,
we haven't got the demand. We don't have those transactions there to show, okay, all people wanted was cheap, normal Bitcoin transactions. Because if that was true, then that would have been proven by now. So clearly we do have to generate more demand from somewhere, but still obviously in line with the original, idea behind Bitcoin. Um,
definitely.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I proposed this, like the month of the fork, or the day after, and I've sat here and watched um, Bitcoin Cash activity not take off, right? And all kinds of investment moving to other things, and also developers, right? Because when you get down to it, what are the developers going to do, right? They're going to start hacking on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain, right? No, like what we want is the majority of developers to be working on applications on top, right? Well, there's a whole fully functional Turing machine scripting language that developers can really get their hands on, right, on top of Ethereum, and in Bitcoin Cash there isn't, right? So this is where we are, right? And I wish those 3 years hadn't happened, but we still have the chance now to kind of deploy this sort of thing and move forward with a fully functional sort of blockchain financial system instead of just a token.
Right, and I agree. And again, like Ethereum seems to have been the place where this has been proven out that there is massive demand for
Hmm.
creating financial products and services, more complex than just sending value from one person to the other. So, Ethereum has done the legwork, but again, they've come into the roadblock that is scalability, whereas Bitcoin Cash can take that information and actually build it into a system that is far more scalable and cheaper to transact. So, like you say, I don't see any reason why we need to essentially make Bitcoin Cash Ethereum, but adding in extra functions that specifically allow some of these, let's say, some of the functions on Ethereum that have done so well would make a
And
lot of
more
sense.
financially focused functions,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Versus just, complete whatever you want, right?
Exactly. So you brought up a good point. I think it's worth us kind of going over a little bit why Group is still not on Bitcoin Cash, because obviously this is a proposal that you put forward quite some time ago now. So maybe it's, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so maybe it's worth you going over kind of what happened there, like what was the process?
What happened and why are the reasons?
Right,
So,
exactly.
yeah. Okay. So, post fork, there was a huge philosophy of if we build it, they will come, right? Just people will just come to Bitcoin Cash because, it's a higher, um, bandwidth Bitcoin. I never believed in that philosophy because of, the first mover advantage of Bitcoin. And if you go way back to like my Japan speech, I said, hey, we have to use the hard fork to create adoption, to create additional use cases to fight this advantage, right? The first mover advantage. But you know, people thought, well, all we need, and people still think, significant numbers of people, and this is, I think, the major thing that's blocking, group tokens, is, people come up with sort of excuses and reasons not to do group tokens, but actually, if you really plug into their philosophy, you will discover they don't want any tokens at all, right? And SLP tokens is sort of safe bet because they're not state of the art tokens anyway, so they probably will not take over the blockchain, right? So that is the primary problem. Also, there is I don't know, maybe a sort of a one-sided irritation always from ABC to Bitcoin Unlimited, typified or shown by some of their blog posts and things. And so we were, I guess, as the incumbent, and as you know the, I don't want to say things that are too controversial, but if you really look at the history, right, Bitcoin Unlimited proposed a fork, and that fork, this is all documents that are in there, right? They're undisputed. That fork, right, created uh, a specification which was originally, committed to Bitcoin Unlimited's repository, which ultimately became the first Bitcoin Cash specification. Okay, and Bitcoin ABC created the first client, right? But they wanted to present themselves as the absolute and sole originator of Bitcoin Cash, not that this was a community effort, right? That we sort of initiated the race. They came out with the first client, and then, by the way, other clients came out, right? Not only Bitcoin Unlimited, but Flowy and a few others were ready at the fork date, right? So this really was a community effort, but you have to knock down your highest competitor, and so ABC, I feel, did everything it could to knock down every proposal that Bitcoin Unlimited made. So if you're like thinking back and you think, oh, Bitcoin group tokens, well, it has like this in your mind, this like sort of feeling. I strongly urge that you revisit that, because what it probably is your the gestalt you got from 3 years of abuse that Bitcoin ABC laid upon its competitors, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
So
that, go ahead. Sorry.
unfortunately, they didn't even want to do anything with tokens, right? I mean, ideally, they would have focused on Avalanche and consensus things, and a new address format. And Bitcoin Unlimited could have been the token people, and some other group could have been the wallet people, right? But that couldn't happen, within that regime.
Yeah, and
There's
that's
no better word to put it, but
right. Yeah, I mean that's one of the best one of the benefits, shall we say, of having multiple development teams with different skill sets is that different people or different teams can work on different things at the same time, and then more innovation happens on the blockchain.
yeah,
But
but you
obviously,
got to let them do it, right? You
right,
got to you got to give them the go. Like if you have 90 to 100% of the hash power, you've got to give the go, right? And be like, oh, that sounds interesting, let's investigate that, blah blah
right, you
blah,
have
right?
to be a good leader, and
Yes.
instead of being a bottleneck, and bottlenecks are not necessarily always a bad thing. Obviously, you need some kind of filter to what does and doesn't get into the blockchain. But obviously, if you're blocking everything, then it probably suggests that there's something else at play there.
Right. You're
So
blocking
yeah,
all ideas except your own, except for if you do like someone else's idea, then you rewrite it as your own and completely re-implement it and respec it. There might be a problem.
yeah, so I agree with your point. I think people should, if they have, let's say, questions about op group, that they should kind of go back and revisit why that's the case, and maybe have a look at group again, and see, is it a good proposal? If it is, or even if it isn't, maybe put some comments about it, so we can try and take it forward.
Yeah,
Uh,
and yeah, that would take it forward, or we could, either modify it, or create a new proposal, or hopefully just modify it though, because a lot of work has been done. It's actually deployed on a small gaming focused cryptocurrency called Ion already. So it has like uh, what's the word, like there's value in its deployment right now. And also other sort of notable um, technologies are very similar. I hate to use the dreaded blockstream word, right? But I guess their liquid uses a UTXO tagging system that's very similar for their tokens, right? I think they sort of have it. I don't think they use the authorities system that gives group tokens a huge amount of flexibility. Um, at least, I mean, I haven't looked at their solution for years, but originally, when I was made aware of their solution, it just kind of tagged um,
mhm.
UTXL similar to group tokens. So, there are other people who definitely think that this is the right way to go.
Right, yeah. I mean, could you maybe go into a bit more detail? Can maybe give some examples of the kind of things you could build with Group? So obviously you can make tokens similar to SLP, but I know that there's other like functions that you can actually do with it. So
Right. So you can create fungible and non-fungible tokens, right? And
I should
then
explain. I should explain for people if you don't, if for people that don't understand what fungible
sure.
is. So it just means that
So
tokens. You go ahead. You explain.
okay, yeah. So fungible tokens are like dollars or some sort of coin that can be just, it doesn't matter which particular one you own, right? They can just be changed, right? Non-fungible tokens represent things that each one has some sort of uniqueness that can't readily be swapped. So, for example, concert seats, right? You can't just randomly swap someone, in the far back to a front seat concert ticket, right? So,
Or
it's very
game
important.
items.
Yeah, game items, exactly. Yeah, so anything like that. Um, so that's one thing. It's very valuable. We could have a whole sort of digital asset system on non-fungible tokens that is then atomically transacted with fungible tokens, right? Like fungible, you have fungible game currency or Bitcoin Cash, right? And you can trade that with your non-fungible game items or concert seats or whatever. So those are two important things. And then another, so if you just take tokens, this is kind of what you get, right? But you have to say, well, with just a little bit more work, particularly a transaction introspection opcode, then suddenly you can get smart contracts. And then with a tiny change to group, which is to mark some groups as being covenanted, which means that one of that the output script of a transaction on a group output has to be the same as an input group transaction script, right? So basically, the script needs to flow across inputs and outputs, right? So why is that important? Well, it means that you can take a script and associate it with the group so that the script enforces the rules of a particular group, right? So this is where, with just one small opcode that says, let's introspect the transactions and get data from the current transaction out, you can add smart contracts into your groups and constrain your groups to a smart contract. And if you can do that, then kind of like the whole world opens up. And in my paper, I showed how you could create. You could first use CDS to create a bet, and then you can create a token that allows you to buy, yes or no's based on that bet, right? And then you can actually create another token that is a prediction market that you can trade and redeem, and then trustlessly. Once the only point of trust is the entity who inputs the outcome of the bet, which presumably happens outside of the blockchain, right? So someone signs a statement saying this is the outcome of this external function, and then all the rest of it happens trustlessly, right? So the people who own a certain token from the prediction market can purchase can redeem those tokens for the outcome of the bet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge kind of DeFi application. And then also something like a constant what do they call, constant product market maker type situation. You could implement that, right, on groups with smart contracts.
So could you explain what you mean by constant product market maker?
So
is that like Uniswap?
Yeah, it is. It's what
Mm-hmm.
Uniswap uses under the covers, as far as I know. So basically, the idea is that you have a pool of two different token types, or maybe one token type and BCH, right? And what you allow any entity to do is to you take the quantity of both of those items and you multiply them together, and that's your constant, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then any entity can take out some of one token and put in some of another, so long as the total product of the total amount in the pools remains equal to that constant or greater, okay? And strangely, you notice there's no prices involved, right? Which is kind of shocking, but strangely, that plus the interactions of entities buying or trading with this market maker actually kind of tracks price, right? So it's a way to create a market maker without having to have an oracle that imports the current price of tokens. And it also avoids, I think, a few legal sort of issues in some countries, because you're not trading against a particular third-party counterparty who may need to be identified, right? And you need to sort of track their identity and do KYC on them. Every person interacting with the system is simply trading against this pool, right? And so that's the thing that is really hot in Ethereum right now. And I can see how you could implement that with this system of transaction introspection plus group tokens. So
Right,
that's kind
and
of exciting.
yeah, that would be a huge thing. I mean, I think the reason
Yeah.
why this has been so big is that you just obviously just sending a payment or transaction to a contract is considerably easier than signing up for an exchange, going through KYC, understanding how the exchange works, then obviously making a transaction, then going through the withdrawal process as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
considerably easier to just send a transaction on Ethereum. So
Yeah,
if we could get something like that on Bitcoin Cash, again with much lower fees than Ethereum, I think that could be significant.
definitely. Definitely. And I do think that with miner validated tokens, it might start to attract entities who are, more willing to put, external, securities or currencies onto the chain, right? Because, the primary fear of an entity like that is, what if the blockchain screws up and lies, and suddenly, you know, there's thousands more of these securities on the blockchain than I have in my bank through no fault of my own, right? Well, miner validated tokens give you some greater assurance that that won't happen, right?
Is that just because the contracts would be much, much simpler to read through and confirm compared to Ethereum contracts?
Yeah, exactly. Instead of having to sort of validate each and every one, so each and every contract, you can say, well, we're going to use the same, logic that is underlying all these other tokens, right? And it's miner validated. So if there is a blockchain, first of all, if there's a block quantity is conserved, even if there's a blockchain fork, right? So as a company, I say, well, we picked fork A, right? That's the one we're honoring, right? So it's not on that company to suddenly have to honor, two forks, like two, a split token across, a fork in the blockchain, right? Um, and then also with something like, a client validated token, uh, if there's a bug in the client code, you have this silent fork idea. So you don't see the fork. The company is honoring these tokens without even knowing it. Suddenly, 6 months later, they realize, oh my God, right? We've honored a whole bunch of fake, invalid tokens, right? And so our reserves are now, 10% of what they should be, right? So that would give me a lot of fear if I was a company thinking about putting securities on blockchain. And I never wanted to say it before 3 years ago because SLP is all we had, right? But if I had to make a guess as to why, companies didn't run out and do this, that fear would probably be why.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're seeing those issues now come up, obviously, with the fact that ABC has forked off. I mean, although there's less of an issue because obviously there's like a significant minority, like a very, very small minority fork. So there's less of a question of, oh, which side are we going to be going on? Because I think basically every token has gone kept on the Bitcoin Cash side. Although there are some that have just decided to accept it on both sides. But obviously, let's say as a token holder of some of those tokens, do you want to that there would you prefer that there's now double the number of tokens some out in the world, that
Right.
will have diluted the value that you had in those tokens? So
Right. So in that case, the company as a whole can simply say, oh, we're picking fork A, right? Or we're picking fork B, or we're actually dividing your value in half and we're going with both forks, right? Versus, ooh, there was a bug in the server that I was using to validate tokens. And so we accidentally paid out tokens that don't actually exist, right? And so now you sort of retroactively have to do something.
hmm. Well, I mean, I really, really hope that people start to now look again at group as an option for miner validated tokens. I know that there's a lot of people now interested in miner validated tokens on Bitcoin Cash, and I think
Great.
a big part of that is because of SLP, and they have understood that this is something that is valuable to BCH and to people in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, I want to thank you for coming on and chatting to us about group your group proposal, Andrew.
Sure.
What I'll do is I'll make sure I'll put in the description like lots of documentation that people can go check out and read up on it. Obviously, if I assume if anyone is interested in getting involved, maybe they can contact you directly to chat about it, or maybe in the
Yep.
Bitcoin Unlimited Telegram group.
Definitely.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I want to thank you for coming on and chatting with us, Andrew.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so thank you all for coming and joining us for the BU podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. This this podcast may also be out on Spotify now and a couple of other places. So make sure you subscribe on there, like, and yeah, we'll have more podcasts for you soon. So take care, everybody. Thanks. Bye.